Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of CCC Talks with Mark O'Loughlin and the Cloud Credential Council. Today, we're joined by Alessandro Bassi, IoT expert and Central Europe Area Manager at Things, and also, if that wasn't enough, President of IoT Italy. Alessandro, thank you very much for joining us on today's podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Now, Alessandro, you describe yourself as an IoT expert. We're going to drill in on that in a couple of minutes. We know that you're heavily invested in digital transformation, Industry 4.0, big data, and IoT, amongst many other things. And you're also leading one of the biggest EU co-funded projects on IoT. I was very excited when I heard that. It comprises what we believe of 19 core partners and hundreds of stakeholders. Now, Alessandro, tell us a little bit about yourself and also this fantastic project.
Yeah, well, I started working on the IoT field in 2007, which makes like 13 years today.
Yeah.
And what I was doing at the beginning is also to help the European Commission to draft the very first calls on IoT and to make sense of what IoT was for the European Parliament, being part of the expert group back in 2010.
Right.
So I'm coming, from, let's say, a bit of diverse background. I am starting with technology. I work with clouds and big data. Before they were calling clouds and big data, so a long time ago, unfortunately. And in the recent years, what I focus is really more on how to implement some sort of coherent IoT strategy for companies, how to transform the business, towards connected objects, and how to put different pieces of this puzzle together, because IoT by itself does not make any sense. It needs big data, it needs artificial intelligence, it needs a lot of stuff, with it. Related to the EU projects, you were talking about, that's IoT-A. One of the huge problems of IoT is that it's such a, sparse, such a galaxy of different technologies, different approaches, different stuff, that not even the definition, there's a single definition of it. If you search on the internet for definition of IoT, you probably find like 40 or 50 different definitions. I myself, I gave 3 of them in history. And, after a while, we can like, oh, that's not really correct. We should, add this or that. That's because really it's really complex, to identify what exactly IoT is, what exactly IoT means. Now, given that, and given the fact that what I consider IoT is basically something which has sensors, actuators, something which is observing some physical entity, which can be, everything and anything. It can be the temperature of this room, can be myself, can be the eggs on the fridge. And basically creating a digital twin or digital entity. I'm using digital twin because it's very, fashionable terms nowadays. So people do tend to understand what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And basically, without, let's say, a modeling foundation, of what we're talking about, it's very complicated, if not impossible, to have different systems talking to each other. At the moment, there is, because IoT is so vast, there is probably not a single entity, not a single company that can do this from head to toe. So there must be some cooperation, some collaboration between different companies, between different vendors, between different stuff. And if there is not even a single language, but a single, let's say, way of understanding what the problem is, then it's basically impossible, to make sense out of it. So that's why basically the European Union thought that it was fundamental to develop some sort of a common scheme, the architectural reference model, which is basically composed by a reference model, which is talking about how to model a problem. I have a problem. Is this an IoT problem or not? Basically, which functional part do I need? Which communication part do I need? Which security part do I need? And then some sort of a reference architecture. One size fits all does not work in the IoT field. So we need some sort of blueprint or a set of blueprints. And according to specific requirements of a specific problem, then I can follow these in order to build a sustainable architecture.
And how Has that project finished, or is it still ongoing at a
Work
European
is
level?
finished, but the result is still pretty alive, let's say.
It's very interesting. I think it's so important with all these newer digital technologies that what we see and we promote as well is a one size does not fit all. It can't anymore. That even for cloud, for IoT, for big data, you need to have some kind of reference architecture model, some security model, all these different models to pull all of this stuff together. It's all loosely coupled these days, even though it's highly integrated. And I think that's a massive challenge. Another thing you mentioned there was sometimes IoT isn't the solution to the problem that you're trying to solve, but IoT can be a part of a solution. You don't wake up one morning and say, we want to deploy IoT, let's go do that. You probably have some problems or challenges or something you have to do in a competitive landscape where IoT can actually help you gain the advantage that you need, but not necessarily IoT on its own, because you need big data, AI, analytics, and probably cloud behind that, and security and compliance, and all these other things that go with it. So it's good to hear, I guess, at a EU level, I'm sure there's at a global level, but certainly at an EU level, there's this view as to how do we understand this for a large community like the European Union. And then whether there's another one for the US, the States, or somewhere else, or whether other organizations or other jurisdictions look at the EU model and take that, maybe that's I guess, the guidance.
Yep.
Can I ask you, you said we find this as well, it's very difficult with a lot of the other technologies to define it simply in a simple definition. So you said you've seen about 40 or so different definitions for IoT. I know I've seen lots when you go search. We have a number of IoT courses, we've tried to define it in a certain way. Is there any definition or phrasing that you've come across for our listeners that you might suggest would be a good starting point for them to define what IoT might be for them?
Well, recently, basically, I came out with, let's say, a three-question checkpoint. I mean, and the answer is yes to all of three. I mean, then you are talking about an IoT problem.
Okay.
One, if there is a physical entity you're observing with a digital twin related to that. Two, if there is
Okay.
any sensors and actuators to that. So
Yes.
not only means sensing the environment, but also modifying the environment. And the number three is there is a certain level of intelligence or computation, I mean, if you take in technology terms, directly linked in the device itself. And
Right.
then you can talk about IoT.
Now, I like that because I've asked you, typically how many people have asked you, give us a definition or can you give us a definition of IoT? And you've turned that around and said, oh, let's not look at the definition. Let's give you three criteria to see, are you talking about IoT? And if you answer yes to these, which you've just outlined to us, you probably are talking about IoT. I like that. I think we're going to blog about that on another day. So we'll reference that back to yourself. But I think that's a good starting point. I'll ask you a little bit later, but I think that's a good starting point for organizations to have a think about. Are there sensors or can there be sensors in play? That kind of thing. Now, you work for a company as well called Things, describes itself as the European Design and Innovation Agency, which is pioneering in the realm of consumer IoT. Can I ask you, what kind of innovations are you seeing coming from the application and the use of IoT? So the end results or the competitive advantage or the innovation, well, what are you
Well,
seeing out there?
the IoT, I mean, if you take into the wildest definition and wild result, I mean, it's a game changer. I
Hmm.
mean, it's a completely, totally different beast of what we have seen today. It's probably even a bigger game changer than the internet itself. The internet, I mean, is, we all know that the world is totally different today than what it was in the 90s, that before the web started, basically.
There was
And
no world before the web.
kind of, yeah. And then there was probably the second revolution, or say 1.5 revolution is probably the mobile revolution.
Yes.
Today, if you take a teenager, try to tell him, I mean, how people used to meet before, I mean, there was WhatsApp or before there was mobile phones. people used to meet friends. Used to meet in train stations, in airports. To pick up people, and it was, it worked. Somehow. And today, things that all these stuff are impossible. If you don't have a mobile phone with you.
Yes.
And for instance, ask people if they prefer to lose their wallet or their mobile phone, and look at the answer.
Oh, here's the wallet right away.
Exactly. More than half say, "Oh, I lose my wallet, no problem. Just call the bank and block the credit card, and I'm done." What is important to think about the IoT in the consumer field is that what it will change, when the revolution, will happen. It will really change a lot of stuff, that we are dealing about every day. The example I'm using very often is the fridge. The connected fridge today basically is no IoT. Let's put it like that. Think about a fridge that is able to order your eggs, order your butter, your milk, your orange juice, and all the, let's say, 80% of the product that you buy week in, week out. Not living in the fancy fish or fancy meat. That you have some for Sunday special, let's say. So just imagine a fridge that is able to do that. Is able to detect how many eggs there are inside. Is able to say, okay, if they're below 3 eggs, I'm gonna order 6 because I like to have a boiled egg in the morning, for instance, or an omelette or whatever. And it's taking care of that. I just give the fridge the order that I like bio eggs. I don't want to spend more than let's say 30 euro cent on it, on a single egg, and so on and so forth, and period. And this is automatically performed by the fridge itself. Now the fridge, what it's doing? It's doing an operation for myself. It's helping me in some tasks. Think about washing machine. It's basically the same stuff. I can wash the clothes by myself. It just takes time. And going to the supermarket to buy eggs, it just takes time. There is no advantage of me going by the eggs or receiving the eggs at home automatically. And but if you think about the deeper business side behind that, is that what does it mean? That my fridge can talk to your fridge, and you talk to somebody on the listener fridge, and then we can order 300 eggs, not 3 or 6. And then we don't need to go to a supermarket, but we can go to the producer directly and ask the producer, okay, like we want 300 of your eggs, tomorrow, which price are you making for us? So what you need is basically some sort of virtual platform, virtual broker, that is connecting you to the butter producer, to the milk producer, to the egg producer. Now, this is like killing the supermarket's business off, right? Because supermarkets are basically brokers. They put in a big box, a lot of producers and lots of consumers. That's why now in coronavirus times, it's such an ugly place to visit. Simply because they put together, all this.
It is.
Now, and really imagine, if this one can be done virtually by your fridge and by some sort of virtual platform, the connecting. Now, of course, this is something that probably Amazon or Bezos may think about it, but one of the issues, for instance, the scale of it. Think about giving away 1 million fridges. They're able to be connected to the internet and so on and so forth. Not one fridge. One fridge. We are able to do it this afternoon. Okay, we just get a 15-year-old a guy which likes Arduino and likes to play with those things. It's done. It's really from the technology point of view, it's not a problem. What is a problem is really what is behind. All the big data analysis or the virtual platform or the connections and the payment systems, the fact that the fridge has a SIM card or not, and so on and so forth. So all these decisions, this business decision that needs to be taken. Think about self-driving cars.
Yes.
What is the nice point of self-driving cars? Is that it's not the fact that I can play on Facebook while I'm driving or read the newspaper. Is the fact that the car can bring me to the office and then drive home and bring my wife to her office, my father to medical center, my kids to school, can go to pick up my shopping at the supermarket, by itself, can pick me up again from work. It can bring me to a restaurant, in the center of town. I don't care about parking simply because the self-driving car can go park 10 kilometers away. I don't simply care. And this is just one family. So probably one family will need one car. And if you think about how much a car is used today, which is, in Europe on average 4% of his lifetime, which means that 96% of his lifetime, an average car in Europe is parked. Basically means that probably 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 families, can just join together and get one car, because it's unlikely, that you need the car, for such an amount of time that is basically hampering, the usage. Or maybe you can have, let's say, 2 or 3 cars every group of families. Let's call it that.
Yes.
This one, what is it killing? Imagine to go to a large car manufacturer and you say, well, the number of cars that is needed in the market, in the next 5 years is not like 1 million, but it's probably like 100,000 or 50,000. Now, this is, another revolution, in the industry sector, because you don't maximize the number of units sold, but you maximize the usage of the units sold.
Yes, it's a different way of looking at it.
Exactly, but go to Bosch and tell them that their target is not to sell 10,000 drills, but to make 10 million holes, and they say, okay, well, but I can close production, because I just need 10 drills for a city. And I say, yes, maybe you need only 10 drills. Now, this is what IoT will bring. So completely new, different business model, which they will put some of the current business in a totally obsolete way. So they will need to close, like internet put some business obsolete or marginal, let's say, and create hopefully new opportunities and new avenues and new roadmaps.
And isn't that, we're calling this Industry 4.0, the next industrial revolution? Isn't that the essence of what happens during any industrial revolution, that the business models that got us here today are not necessarily the models that will last during this revolution for the future? They either adapt, change, use the technology to think of doing things differently in different ways and different business models, or they're likely to wither away and not be in existence by the end of whenever this revolution ends. Isn't that part of the cycle we're in at the moment? I think we're in the industrial revolution. We're getting newer technologies more often. We're trying to use them, but a big thing I see organizations struggle with is trying to imagine what the new looks like, trying to imagine what the new model looks like, trying to imagine, as you said, well, I might say, why do I want the fridge to order eggs? Because I just like going to the shop. That's my thinking from the previous revolution, but I happy to put my clothes in the washing machine rather than scrub them myself. That was how people used to do it before washing machines. So I'm conditioned to what I know based on my experiences from the past. But the challenge is trying to break from that experience and knowledge to apply something like IoT to do something new and different, to challenge models to do things differently. And I love that idea of, I don't know if it'll happen, but everybody, close all your neighbors, ordering all the eggs from the fridge, going directly to a supplier rather than the shop. You'll get better price points, you get better delivery, you get better whatever that is. You're cutting out the middleman. But also behind all of that, so that's a new model. And if you're a business, you want to expand that fridge analogy into what does that mean in your business and your supply chain. We're talking about eggs and the neighbors, but really what I want to think about is, what are those eggs in the business context? What's the middleman in the business context and the supply chain? And how could I use that type of analogy and simple thinking to change how I do business in my industry? And I think that's the organizations that will use IoT correctly and will use it to their benefit going forward. But isn't that the challenge, trying to figure out what is new based on our past experiences?
It is a huge challenge. It is a huge challenge, and sometimes, when I speak to conferences or to events or to people, or even doing some consultancy, I see face with things like, okay, this is visionary, this is science fiction, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, go back to the 70s, and talk about mobile phones and booking a plane. Not these days, but booking a plane. Just using your mobile phone. and checking in using your mobile phone, having a boarding pass on your mobile phone. So basically, you can do the whole process. I mean, the only touch point that you have, I mean, for flying is your phone. It can be only your phone. Now, what you're saying is totally right. I mean, Industry 4.0 is two big innovations. One innovation of product and second innovation of process. So how to build this product.
Yes.
What we see, and this is now I put the hat of president of IoT Italy. What you see is not so much lack of investment, of lack of money, I mean, for doing that. It's more that, industry are like, why shall I do that? All the advantages I see is theory. Nowadays my business is going decently well. When a competitor are gonna do it, then we are gonna do it. It's basically waiting for next one. I don't want to be the first one on the train if the train is leaving in 10 days. I just to sit on the train, 10 minutes before the train is leaving.
Yeah.
And everybody is waiting, trying to understand. I mean, when the train is leaving, to jump on it.
And that's a challenge, because then we all scramble and get stuck in the doors, and some of us get on, some of us don't. And I think that's where we are at the moment. There's been some leaders having a go, but a lot of, I think, cautious minds thinking, let's see. I think they need to get more inventive. I think they need to go into I don't want to go into blue sky thinking, but certainly they need to stop looking at current models and business models and operational models and supply chain models and think new, and then put solutions like IoT and the big data and all these other things. How can we get new with all of these technologies? And how can we get ahead? We know that large organizations that can get some competitive advantage probably are the ones thinking like this at the moment, or investing in time and the resources to go think differently, because so many of us are stuck in the business as usual cycle, working and managing the now, not thinking about the future. And I think we need to think a little bit about that, because we are in this. It's fantastic to be in an industrial revolution, to see it. When it started, when will it end? We can debate those, but I think we're in it, we're seeing it, so we're part of it. I think it's important for us to take that on. Maybe on this point, I saw a quote recently from the CIO of Aria Systems, Brendan O'Brien, and his quote is, if you think that the internet has changed your life, think again. The Internet of Things is about to change it all over again. And I think that's what you're saying. I think it talks directly to that quote.
I totally agree with that quote, yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Now, what I wanted to ask you about that was, maybe there's two types of IoT here. And again, just to keep things simplified for the moment, there's the business application of it. Businesses looking and should be changing how they do business and the operation models that we spoke about. But isn't there a consumer side to it? So another example I'll give you is a fitness Fitbit, something like that, fitness tracker that somebody might wear. So to them, they exercise, they go for a jog, they go to the gym, even when they're resting and sleeping, it's generating data and they use it. But to them, they don't see that as IoT anything. They probably don't even use the word IoT regarding their fitness tracker. They talk in terms of the device or the app that they're using. Well, I have this fitness tracker and it's tracking calories and miles run and all this, all this kind of stuff. So is there something for people to think about from an IoT perspective from the consumer side, or do we not want them to think about it? Another example is the heating system. So we get thermostats now that you can operate from your phone when you're not at home. They all use little IoT sensors and apps and all the internet technologies. But I can tell you, I mean, my wife doesn't think about, I'll use the IoT app to switch on the heating. It's really, I just switch on the heating with the app. They don't think about it in terms of IoT. So isn't there an element of IoT is largely hidden, rightly or wrongly, to the consumer? Or they probably don't care about the IoT part, they just care what it does. Is there any implication of that?
Yeah, well, famous Mark Weiser quotes that, successful technology is a technology that disappears into fabric of life.
True.
And
Very true.
let's say that what you are citing, I mean, is this clear example of steps towards, let's say, IoT, but it's not fully IoT.
Yes.
I'm happy to have a Fitbit. I mean, that when I go to gym, is measuring how many calories I'm using and so on and so forth. But what I would like to have is some sort of a Fitbit that is talking to the machines that I'm using, or tells me exactly which weight I should lift. Because I'm thinking like, okay, maybe 100 kilo deadlift is okay for me today,
Yes.
but maybe for what I ate, I should try 80 or should I try 120. And today what I'm doing is filling.
Yeah.
More or less, I think this is okay. I mean, my back is not hurting, my legs are not hurting, so maybe I should add 10 kilo more. And what I mean these technologies should do is, because they know all my life, right? And if you think about Fitbit, think about the next step. Fitbit can talk to the fridge and know what's in my fridge and what I had for breakfast, what I had for lunch, what I had for dinner. Home.
That's probably
So,
not a good thing for me with a Fitbit in the fridge. It will
yeah,
give out to me.
exactly. And how many beers did I have? And staying at home, clothes, and you say,
That's
you
what I'm
should really,
afraid of. Yeah, it will stop buying the things that I really want because it
exactly,
figures I'm going to the gym, so you shouldn't eat or drink this stuff. I hope there's a bypass
exactly.
switch for some of that.
Yeah, I guess when the fridge is ordering non-alcoholic beer, then it's the time to switch back to an old fridge.
Okay, I'll take that. We should be a bit more healthier.
Exactly.
Hmm,
But what I mean is that when these objects, that can help in our lives, to make us to feel better and so on and so forth. Then they also gonna I want to say take this decision, but also push us to which is what we are supposed to do. Now this is
yeah,
a fully fledged IoT stuff. That's because there is a lot of data behind it, and the data is basically my life.
yeah,
So how much am I sitting on the chair? Am I supposed to go for a little walk, even 10 minutes or 15 minutes, just to move myself from time to time? Sometimes I remind myself to do that. Sometimes I don't, and then like, oh, I'm like 5 hours sitting on this chair and I didn't move, not even for go for a coffee or the toilet. So that's not good, and so on and so forth. So all these one, can definitely help. In case of Fitbit, let's say for wellness, for having a healthier life and a better life. But what we have today is I want to say half-baked solution, but not for sure, the complete IoT solution that we expect.
yes. And that's, again, as you said, we're in this journey of industrial revolution, so we have to do it in stages. I think stage one is getting people to use and accept trackers. And then the onus going back to these companies like Fitbit or whoever that is to go and then redevelop that for the next phase or the next iteration, as you said. Okay, we now know you're using it, but let us give you guidance on how to do the things you're doing based on what we know about you. And I guess that requires then this integration. IoT doesn't, you said it earlier, does not exist on its own. It needs to have maybe cloud behind it, huge amount of storage, AI stuck in there, big data, because of all of that is part of the IoT story, isn't it? It just doesn't
Yes.
exist on its own.
I just make an example on that. And this is like a first life example, so something I was consulting with. So there is this company, I will not name it, because we're not endorsing anybody here. But basically, they were studying the fact that the portable cameras, the small cameras, handheld cameras, basically sales are going sharply down. That's because we all have a mobile phone,
Yep.
and if you need a picture, we take it with the mobile phone and then we send it, immediately with Messenger, with WhatsApp, with whatever. And because they didn't want, let's say, to kill the line, they were saying, okay, how can we make this survive? Or to keep it alive.
Yep.
Lots of competition on prices and so on and so forth. And basically, what I was suggesting them is that, okay, well, give the box for free. just give cameras for free. Just go on the website, you just put your address, and we ship your camera for free. With a little bit, I wouldn't say a string attached, but with the possibility of using the images that you're taking, not for commercial use, but for whichever use. For instance, you are in a city, you take a picture in a park. The city may be interested in to know the state of the park, the state of the green. If it needs some trees need trimming, or something needs to be changed, or so on and so forth. If the urban, let's say, settlement, needs some modification, or so on and so forth. So all this data, of course, what is the problem is that, okay, the camera taking picture has no problem. The camera sending the picture to the cloud, uplink, no problem. The problem is that imagine to have like 1 million cameras in a city uploading 10 million pictures a day. And, in this case, the freshness of the information is vital. Because, if I need to cut a tree, I need to cut it now. Not 6 months ago, that you should have cut that tree. That is a bit too late. So the problem there is to develop basically a backend which is able to sustain calls or sustain applications. That can be huge, totally different, but all based on data analysis. In almost real time. So here we're not talking about milliseconds. Maybe you're talking about minutes or hours. But still, sometimes which is sometimes it's has to be pretty fast considering the amount of data that needs to be analyzed. So the issue there was not really the fact that how much data you can actual value, you can extract from the data, but is how much backend do we need to extract that value.
That's an interesting view. It's an interesting view. I think, are we too early for that? I don't know. I think organizations, there are some that will think about that and how to capitalize that. I think it's an interesting view and a good point of something different for the new world. That's not overly radical, but it is slightly different. As you said, taking these pictures, and the picture is relevant to the person taking it, but it's also relevant and has value to some other organization, body, groups that might be able to do something else with it. I think that's, I think it's interesting. We'll see where it goes. We'll have a look at that a little bit later on. What we found is a while ago you co-authored a book. You're involved in a book called Enabling Things to Talk. We like that, especially regarding IoT. I think that's a great idea. And it was looking at designing IoT solutions with the IoT architectural reference model. I know you spoke a little bit earlier about the EU looking at a reference model. Is there anything else from that book that would be of interest to our listeners regarding IoT and the conversation we're having?
Well, yes. First of all, the book is for free, so you can download it for free. And that was
Fantastic.
And that was a decision, because basically we wanted to give the widest possible audience, to this book.
Yeah.
So I'm not getting a penny, for the downloads, just pride, personal pride, but not money. That book is divided in two parts. So the first part is higher level, so to make people understand what IoT is, to make people understand which kind of revolution we can expect, and so on. And the second part is much more technical. So okay, we are a startup or we are a large corporation and we want to develop a specific product on IoT. What do we do next? And an example that, again, I was using this is the gun that shoots for only to bad people.
Yes.
Is this an IoT problem? Yes, it is. There is a physical entity, which is the bad guy, and a virtual entity or digital twin, which is the record of his criminal record. Before there is a sensor, which is obviously observing. There is an actuator, clearly it's a gun. And there is some sort of intelligence. The gun needs to decide. If the guy in front is bad or not. So he's taking a picture, he's analyzing the picture, he's seeing if it's a criminal person, he sees if he's basically acting something against you or is simply walking into the street, minding his own business, and so on and so forth. and then decide either to shoot it or not. And of course, this is like a fun idea, but the issue is that this one was used, I mean, as a fil rouge to show how how a problem, I mean, like this can be modelized, can be which kind of architecture do you need for this? I mean, is it feasible to have a central cloud somewhere in the world, or you need to put the information, I mean, closer to where the guns are, or even in the gun itself, and so on and so forth. And then, which kind of technology would you need? I mean, is 5G, today it would be 5G, I mean, that would be good or not, and so on and so forth. And then to develop the stuff. So the second part of the book is really, hopefully, trying to guide, I mean, the developers, I mean, hand by hand in picking the right modeling space, picking the right communication, picking the right functional blocks, and picking the right protocols, picking the right technologies, I mean, in order to solve the problem.
Great. So there's a lot in there. As we noticed, there is 2 parts of the book, and I think that was a very good choice to do. So the book, Enabling Things to Talk, Designing IoT Solutions with the IoT Architecture Reference Model. Alessandro, as you said, you're one of the authors of that book, and it's free. We'll do a blog about that, and we'll talk a bit more about that another day. So we think that's a good reference point. Can I ask a question? Regarding organizations and their use of IoT. It's a straight question. Where are companies going wrong? What are 1 or 2 of the big areas where they're not doing it the way they should be doing, in your experience? Where are they going wrong with all this IoT stuff?
Well, in Italy, there is, if you play tennis, there is a typical Italian expression, which is a braccino corto, like short arm.
Right.
I think that organizations should be daring more. I'm not endorsed by them, but I would expect somebody like Amazon to go much further. Amazon already transformed completely, let's say, first of all, bookstores, then, I mean, a marketplace over the internet, and then, I mean, cloud technologies, because, AWS is basically nowadays a standard, I mean, in cloud technologies. I mean, you can use Azure, you can use other stuff, but, AWS is, is there. So I would expect, I mean, some of these, big players, I mean, to have more guts, in a sense, and go for it. We're not going backward, we're going forward.
Yeah, they seem to provide you with the platform and the architect and the software to do something with IoT, but you have to go figure out how to connect it, get sensors, get all the other things together. So certainly with companies I've spoken with and we've seen regarding CCC, that they're saying, look, we expected that we went to this software platform for IoT and it would all work. What we found was a part of what we needed to do, but we had to go figure out the other 8 things that we had to do to make all of this work, and that just seemed too complex. Good. Can I turn the question around and say, in your experience then, there are companies that are doing very well with IoT. What are they doing right that other companies could think about?
Well, to do things well in IoT, it's like a very subtle alchemy, in a sense. I mean, if you're not a large corporation like Google or Amazon, I mean, they can probably invest like billions into it and see how it goes. You need, first of all, to have a very good plan on first of all, to solve like any product an issue, which is a business problem you're solving, I mean, with your stuff. Let's say if you want to do this Fitbit Plus, which issues, I mean, are we solving? 2, I mean, to truly think about what you need in front and in the back. So it's not only which kind of sensor do you need and which kind of actuator do you need, but also which kind of backend do you need, which kind of intelligence do you need to put on the machine itself, and on the cloud, I mean, in order to solve the problem. And number 3, and also very, very important, how to scale. Because if you have something which is sold in 10 or 100 it's one thing. If you solve something which is like millions or hundreds of millions, it's a totally different beast. So
Yes, yes.
sometimes, I mean, I hear project or review projects, I mean, and they're great, you know, if they're done for, let's say, 100 objects, and then you say,
Yes.
okay, guys, you know, what if we, you know, what if we get 1,000 orders? What if we get 10,000 orders? And then, oh, we'll figure it out then. And say, no, you have to figure it out now.
buy, buy a 3D printer and hope it prints whatever you need for your IoT. Yeah,
Yeah, I
that
mean,
is that. It is a good point, as you said, with scale as well. There's scale in, well, the scale in a couple of things in your sensors, and your actuators. There's scale in then the data that you collect. That's going to get massive. If you
yes,
scale, the more devices you scale, the more data. That could be more cost. And again, what we're seeing, what I've seen with some organizations that have gone into IoT, and it's like they've turned all the collection centers on. They collect everything,
yeah,
but they know nothing because there's so much data. It's unstructured. There's no way of analyzing it, or they've yet to figure out what it is they want from the data, or it's just too vast that they almost give up, or they've missed an opportunity that they have so much data that if they were to analyze it and get the scientists to figure it out, that they could have some gold, but they're too unstructured to even figure out the unstructured data. So I see that's a big challenge there. Can I ask him regarding data as well? A question comes up a lot that we hear. So if you deploy some IoT devices and you're getting customer data back, whatever form that is, isn't there a big challenge with organizations regarding data privacy and security?
of course, yes.
Or is that just put it in the cloud and all your security problems are solved?
Well, if you trust the cloud, indeed. I mean, but no, there is a huge problem with privacy and security. Uh, Again, let's go back to Fitbit talking to your fridge. I mean, you might give permission to your Fitbit to access certain data. You might give to your fridge a permission to access certain data. Do you give Fitbit and the fridge permission to talk to each other? And you know, and
Yes,
in the future, do you give the fridge permission to talk to your insurance company and so on and so forth? You know, to
yes,
help insurance and so on. So I mean, there we're really entering a very delicate area. IoT can be pretty invasive in people's life.
yeah,
It's, you know, again, in the past, I was speaking a lot about Internet of Hackable things. That's because for a number of reasons, because we're talking about constrained the devices which cannot support, let's say, a very strong encryption and authentication and so on and so forth,
yeah.
are easy target, I mean, for hackers. You know, back 2 or 3 years ago, if you went to Black Hat conferences, I mean, they say, you know, hacking Windows, you know, is so last decade. I mean, you know, now the cool thing is hacking objects.
Isn't it? I came
Yeah,
across a fascinating case study. It was a couple of years ago now, and I'm sure we can find the details on the web. It was a Las Vegas casino was
yeah,
hacked through an IoT sensor in the fish tank in the lobby.
that is
That
correct.
was the
Yes,
weak point. And it
that
was
is
like,
correct.
wow. And I've used that ever since in talks about cloud, IoT, whatever digital technology it is, that fits because it's always about security.
Yeah,
Regardless of the technology, you cannot forget that. I would think, and maybe you can correct me, that I asked you earlier on, where should businesses start? And one of the first things you said was start with a plan. I would suggest as well part of that plan should be as well a heading called security and data privacy, and that you plan that well in advance as to how you're going to put it in, maintain it, and ensure. Because say you have these sensors and they're on consumable devices, if you're a company that now gets hacked and that customer data gets exposed, your company loses reputation and trust. And consumers vote with their feet and their hearts. And if you lose trust with a consumer group, they may well leave you and not buy your goods anymore, and business is over. So I
yep,
think it's such a huge part that in essence, some companies still focused on, oh, it's IoT, I don't need to think about security. I think that's the wrong thing. Security and privacy is part of any of these digital technologies, cloud, big data, IoT, whatever that is, and they're so interlinked. You can have all the security on your IoT sensor, but your data center gets hacked where the information is stored in your big data.
Yep,
So it
that's
goes
a
back
good
to,
thing.
yeah, and I think it goes back to thinking about the architectural reference model that you mentioned in the book. And that expands more than just one, it's architecture around about IoT, design, governance, data security process. It's so expansive, I think. But I'm still seeing organizations looking at IoT as a technology that will solve problems and do all this great stuff, but they don't understand, as usual, they have to think about all these other things as well, especially data privacy, security, and that. And then there's a final thing on this is I think where you store your data is as important. And if you're storing it in clouds, do you know where that is? Because we now have different data jurisdictions, EU law different to US law, different to South American law and Chinese law regarding data privacy or lack of data privacy in some countries.
Yeah,
But if you don't know where your data is because you're in some kind of cloud, wherever that is, that may be a problem too that you don't even know. So we can create problems that we don't know about, which can be very, very difficult should something happen, I think.
indeed. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Uh, this is, this
challenges
is
there.
this is totally true. I mean, for for security, I mean, if your objects can be hacked, it will be hacked. So
Fantastic. Well,
what I keep
so
telling everybody is that put as much security as reasonable. Clearly, I mean, in your stuff. Clearly, for Fitbit, like it is not a nuclear power station, so clearly you don't need to use the same standard.
true.
On the
Yeah,
other hand, I mean, put as much security as needed, from the very beginning, from the very initial design of your stuff. Simply because, I mean, it would be hacked anyway. There is no silver
yeah.
bullet. I mean, you give enough time, enough motivation, enough money, somebody will hack it
Yeah,
eventually.
and we're seeing that there's been a lot of security breaches in the last year or two around the globe, and large organizations losing data. So it's not just this new technology; it's some of the traditional stuff. But I like that phrase. If you have a device, assume it can be hacked. If it can be hacked, it will be hacked. So I think you have to assume that way. But I think you have to go then through, well, if you hack this device, for example, use the Las Vegas casino, where can this device go? What can it get into? What can it access? What data can it expose? And that Las Vegas casino found out they got hacked, and they lost a sizable sum of money due
Yeah.
to an unsecure sensor in the fish tank. And I think by design, IoT devices are very small, just generally, especially consumer devices. So it does put some restrictions to a point on the level of security and the chips you can get in there. But I don't think that should be an excuse. Just to say
No.
that the technology is so small, the security chips we can only do so much with it. I think we've got to do better as an industry.
Yeah. Well, just think that one thing. I mean, I don't know the data for 2019, but for 2018. In comparison to 2017, I mean, the hacking of medical data grew tenfold
Yeah,
worldwide. And why it grew tenfold, I mean, this hacking? Simply because, I mean, hackers, I mean, go to hospital, they hack the data, especially private hospital, and then they say, okay, either you put $1 million into his bank account, or, next day, all your medical records will be open to the public.
yeah,
Boom.
yeah. It's
And when you're thinking that more and more medical objects are connected to the web, connected to whatever. Then can be, like temperature sensor in a fish tank, can be temperature sensor in a room, or a thermometer of a patient. I mean, they can be hacked, and
yeah,
boom, you enter the whole medical system. So, especially in these fields, I mean, medical fields, wellness, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's really fundamental to respect, I mean, as much as possible the security standards and paradigms, I mean, that are around.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think in these strange times that we find ourselves in, there will be a bigger push now to people using medical services more remotely. We're having to
Yeah.
do it now in these times, and I think there'll be more sensors to allow the doctors not to, don't come to surgery. Here's a little kit, hook this up, give us a call, and we'll be able to diagnose you more. But I think while we're doing that, as you said, we need to focus a lot more on that security because it can open up so many doors. Um, at this stage, we normally ask you some quick fire questions. So I'm going to give you some questions, short answers. We'll see where we go, see how, how we get on. We have a couple here. Is IoT overhyped? What do you think?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that for marketing purposes, yes. No, I mean, it will be really a true revolution.
It's those marketeers again, isn't it? They just blow this stuff out of proportion. But if they didn't, now do in order to use IoT, do organizations require large investments, large capital investments to begin with? What do you think? Or can they do
Mm,
it small scale?
again, it can be true, generally be true, but again, it also depends by, as we were talking before, the scale. So
Yes, fair
if you're
enough.
planning to
Yeah,
scale high, yes, indeed.
yes, but then there can be cheap entry points. So scale
Of
is a
course,
good
of course,
good indicator as to what investments you do need.
of course. I
Yeah,
mean,
good, good.
you can also plan the scale, I mean, so that it does not hurt. I
Yeah,
mean, the fact that you don't
of
have
course.
a $1 billion, I mean, in your bank account when you start.
Yes, yes, yes. No, most companies won't. Most people or their organizations don't really understand the potential of IoT. True or false, do you think?
True,
True.
definitely
Should
true.
they start learning about the potential of IoT?
Well, they can forget at their peril. I mean,
Or just wait to
ignorance,
buy the fridge that gets the eggs?
ignorance is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, true. We got this to ask you. All you need for IoT is some sensors. That's it. That's all we need. No,
No.
I think we discussed earlier on. There's so much more that even people that have started to do IoT have only realized. And then what I've seen in my experience is they get to the end of all of that, and they then realize we need better security and data privacy and all those other things, which is good. Um, Innovation from IoT will stall or proceed at a slow pace for the foreseeable future. What do you think about that?
This is really a crystal ball question because it might stall for another 2 years and then boom, explode. It might
Yeah,
be stall for 6 months or 5 years. I mean, to me, we're talking before about the train, is that when the train is supposed to leave. I mean, it will leave. It will leave eventually, but
yes. So what we have is there's a train. We have a lot of people waiting to get on it. We don't know when it's arriving, but we know when it does, there'll be a big scramble for the doors. Some will get on,
yeah,
some won't get on. Good, good.
exactly.
I like that. Maybe the train will have some IoT sensors to work out the correct number of people that should be on the train, and then close the doors. And
Probably.
finally, many companies have looked at doing something with IoT, but they have failed to find something of use or something capable of generating revenue. Do you think that's a true false statement?
Well, it might be true, but often because they are using an old business model. Clearly, I
Yes.
mean, if you're trying to adapt, I mean, IoT to existing business model, it might be very badly fit. So, in a sense, I mean, when you adopt a full IoT strategy, you have to embrace also sometimes totally new business models.
I think that's fantastic as we're coming to the end of this, that adopting IoT with a traditional business model is unlikely to get you success. You've got
Yeah,
to think different, have change in mind, probably start with an existing model and then uh, break it down into all its parts, but then leave it there and then
yeah.
move into new thinking. Alessandro, that's fantastic. Alessandro, we're finishing up, do you have any final words on how IoT is relevant for the times that we find ourselves in right now?
Well, if more devices will be installed at home, you can do first of all, some health tests at home, period.
Mhm. Yeah.
If the fridge can order the eggs and butter, I will not supposed to go to to a supermarket. So I mean, social distancing, I mean, might be easier, I mean, to have.
Yes. Yes.
And there is a lot of stuff, I mean, that connected devices can help you. Also keeping
Yeah.
fit at home, because it's not easy. I mean, if you don't have a gym, if you cannot get jogging, if you cannot play football or whatever, or tennis, I mean, then it's really a problem. So I mean, these connected devices, I mean, if they will be more into the fabric of our lives, I'm sure that they will give us a better time. Rather than checking every day, how is the curve going, and when is the expected end of
Yeah.
quarantine.
Yes. Yes. I guess what it will probably do as well is have a lot of individuals and companies thinking about new ways of doing things, because we're having to experience new ways of doing things right now. Some of them we can do, some of them we've yet to imagine. So maybe from these difficult times, we'll find some enlightenment in all of this. Alessandro Bassi, thank you so much for joining us today on CCC Talks. I think that's been a fantastic view of IoT. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you for having me. Thank you.